So welcome everyone to this Longchen Shedra special online event today with our guest speakers, Denis Barát and Dr. Julian Schott. And so I have the pleasure to introduce these two speakers to you. Denis Barát is from Slovakia, and he will talk about India at the time of the Buddha, the culture of the Greater Magadha, and he studied Indian and Tibetan studies at the Charles University in Prague and spent 1 year at the Rangjung Yeshe Institute. And in his academic life, he has focused on Indian Buddhism and narrative literature. And currently, he teaches ancient Indian history at the I cannot really pronounce this, I'm sorry, at the Masaryk University in Brno. I hope it was somehow close to what it should be. And then we have Dr. Julian Schott, and he will talk about the 3 Dharmacakras and give a brief overview of the context and the related doctrines. And Dr. Julian Schott is from Germany, and he studied in geology, philosophy, and religious studies at Göttingen, Pune, and Hamburg. And he also studied 6 years Tibetan, and he wrote his dissertation in Hamburg. And afterwards, he was teaching Sanskrit and Tibetan in Sydney and at the Rangjung Yeshe Institute. And he returned to Hamburg. And now, very freshly, he's in Vienna at the South Asian Tibetan, at the Institute for South Asian Tibetan and Buddhist Studies. And we're very happy that we have these 2 qualified speakers here. And Julian, he's also a Longchen Shedra student. He is studying in Group C in the first year. Yes, so we will start with Denis Barát. So I give the word to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So I will try to share my screen. Okay.
Maybe just a second. Of course, there is many people join here, especially Longchen Shedra's students. So I will going to invite many more scholars in these platforms, and also our own students. There is a lot of also qualified different subject. They will also share, and also they will time to time they will also doing presentation on their subject. So we have 3 groups in Longchen Shedras. And for example, Dr. Julian, he's, as mentioned Carmen, the background, and also studying our Longchen Shedras here. And it's very good that also going to present his background knowledge, which is sometimes I cannot describe it, okay? And also our Denis, Carmen says different name, that is new for me, but I was teaching in Buddhist Tumu practice for 1 week so he was practicing there at the same time translating to a local language, and I find out very knowledgeable, because when somebody translate to you, you can feel it how they translate, even though you don't understand. You feel it really. Then immediately I began to dig his background. I know very well Julian, but his this time second time we met, so this time we have a great class, Tumo, Namche Tumo. And then I got more about his background, and immediately I invite him to speak here. So these are very important. They are bringing their knowledge and enjoy and learn this knowledge. And this is a great opportunity that I felt that our organizer are providing for all the students. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will now share the screen. Oh, no, not this one. Oh, this one. Okay. So I have been asked to speak here about a topic from a history of India, and the topic I have chosen is I'm sorry, I have to figure out the screen sharing. Okay, so I have been asked to speak about the topic from history of India, and that is connected with Buddhism. And I have decided to speak about the topic which is connected with Buddhism, maybe we could say only indirectly, because it speaks about not about the Buddha himself, but about the context of the Buddha and of the arising of Buddhism, and so on. And also, I will speak about maybe the context of how we got to where we got to the time of the Buddha, and which I think is important to know the context in which the Buddha taught, in which the Buddha lived, and to know what was around him at the time. So first, I will start maybe very briefly in the prehistory to give some background of how we got to the time where the Buddha was teaching in India. So that is so we can know how we got to the time of the Buddha. So we have very little information about this period. We do not have any direct findings, any historical sources, and so on. So we only have basically two sources of information, and those are either archaeological sources or textual sources. And both of these are not the best types of sources in this instance, especially because the Indo-Aryans, the people who settled northern India at this point in time, it seems were pastoralist or nomadic or semi-nomadic, which is a type of culture which does not bring with itself the building of monuments or cities, which we could find in archaeological findings. And also the textual sources are not the best source because they are not primarily historical. So we have to engage in interpretation and know what is the historical root and what is not historical, what is mythological, for example. So what we can surmise is that the Indo-Aryans, the settlers of northern India entered India around the 18th or 13th century BCE, and today we can know this and also this time with a high degree of certainty thanks to genealogical studies. And after this time, after these Indo-Aryans came into India and settled in the area that is now Pakistan and northwestern India around Punjab, they also started to compose their religious texts, their ritual texts, the oldest portion of these religious texts, which we call Vedas, and the oldest portions of the so-called Rig Veda, which are hymns to deities and also about hymns about different topics. So after the Indo-Aryans settled in this area, northwestern area, there was a very gradual eastward migration. The migration and the settling of northern India wasn't quick. It didn't happen within 1 or 2 generations. It happened over multiple centuries, so it was very slow. So from northwestern India, from today's Pakistan and Punjab and so on, the Indo-Aryans slowly moved into closer to Ganga and Yamuna, the confluence of Ganga and Yamuna, and then east of the confluence to what is close to today's Bangladesh and so on. So also when they were settling northern India, they shifted from this pastoralist lifestyle, this more nomadic lifestyle, to a settled lifestyle. And the shift from a settled lifestyle slowly brought with itself development, which we called urbanization. And urbanization, to put it most simply, is the process where a population begins to form cities. And why we call it second urbanization, it is not because the Indo-Aryans had started forming cities first time before that. It is because it is the second time this happened in northern India. The first time was 1,000 years before in the Indus Valley civilization. So the reasons why a population might start to create cities are multiple, but maybe the most important one is that there are effective ways of farming, effective agriculture, which creates agricultural surplus. So the population can feed more people and can feed even people who do not work directly on the fields. And in northern India at this time, this was the invention of cultivation of wet rice cultivation, so growing rice on flooded fields, which suddenly created a lot of crops. And together with this and the creation of new arable land, of new farming places, this also slowly started bringing with itself the creation of people, of parts of society who hold power, and also it started bringing with itself trade and commerce and so on. And then these people started coming to groups and in places which became the centers of power or the centers of commerce and so on. And these then became cities. And these cities in northern India at this time, in the first half of the first millennium BCE, we call them Mahajanapada. So the great Janapadas, or the great places where the people live. And these Mahajanapadas were states. They usually were states where it was one city, and around the city there was rural land, and in the more important, in the larger Mahajanapadas, there could have been more than one city, and so on. So there's a traditional list that in northern India at this time there were 16 such Mahajanapadas, and we have this list from early Buddhist sources. And we can look already now at this map. So we see that the Mahajanapadas, the cities, were mostly in this area in northern India. And so here we have Indus, and also here we have Ganga and Yamuna and their confluence. And the area which we are focusing on right now is essentially this area. So it is the area with the Mahajanapadas of Kosala and Magadha. And what can also be said about these Mahajanapadas is that there were two types of these Mahajanapadas, two different ways they were ruled. And one was that they were ruled as kingdoms, which was the case, for example, in the Mahajanapada of Magadha, which also had this capital city in Rajagaha, where during the Buddha's time, it was the king Bimbisara, and after him, the king Ajatashatru, and so on, or also the kingdom of Kosala. And the second type were the so-called Ganasanghas, and the Ganasangha was a type of government where there was a ruling class, a ruling assembly of clan leaders, and one of the, for us, important Janapadas, which was a Ganasangha, which was ruled by a group of clan leaders, was the Shakya Republic, the republic or the state where the Buddha grew up. So now, after this short introduction, we can now turn towards the topic of the context in which Buddhism arose, in which the Buddha lived, and not just Buddha, but also different traditions. Most importantly, also Jainism, which is the second tradition which was created or which arose in this culture, in this area, and survives until today. So, to know, it is important to know what is the context of the Buddha, of the Buddha's teachings, and because then we can know what kind of ideas he and his students were interacting with, and which kinds of ideas he was maybe also addressing in his teachings. And the previous idea, or the idea that first arose also among Western scholars, was that at this time, so we are now speaking maybe about around the middle of the first millennium BCE, there was just one single culture in northern India. So the whole northern India, as we have it in this map, was just one culture. And this culture can be termed as Brahmanical. So we can, how do we define a Brahmanical society? So it is a society which is hierarchically stratified. So specifically, it is divided into four varnas, four groups of people, and one is born into their varna. And these four are the Brahmins, which are at the very top of the societal hierarchy, and then the Kshatriyas, who are supposed to occupy the roles of ruling and war and fighting and protecting and so on. And then the Vaishyas, who are the householders and who work on the fields or in commerce and so on. And then there are the Shudras, who are the servants. So this is one characteristic of a Brahmanical society, which is very strictly stratified, very strictly divided into these groups, into societal hierarchy. And as I already mentioned, one other characteristic is that Brahmins are at the very top of this societal hierarchy. They are the people who the others should respect the most. And then another important characteristic is the centrality of sacrifice. So at this time, in Brahmanical society, what was very important was a very complex sacrifice, very complex offering to the gods, which was done according to very strict rules that had to be followed to the letter. And moreover, these sacrifices had to be followed, had to be done, because if they were not done, then the world couldn't exist. They were important, so the world could continue to exist. And also, as Brahmins were the highest level of society, they also were those who were performing these sacrifices and who were holding this sacred tradition. And then, on the background of this kind of culture, it was thought of that Buddhism and also the other traditions like Jainism were a reaction against these Brahmins. They were a reaction against this rigid societal hierarchy and Brahmanical sacrifice and so on. So Buddhism was thought of as an ascetic or a very ethically oriented movement, a reformist movement, maybe even, in this Brahmanical environment. However, there are some problems with this idea. And these problems, we can say, I have here outlined 3 types of problems. And the first problem is the definition of so-called Aryavarta. So Aryavarta is the land of the Aryas, land of the noble. And in this context, the word Arya is not used as it is used in Buddhism for a realized being, but Arya refers to the higher levels of society, and especially to Brahmins who uphold the Vedic tradition, the Brahmanical tradition. And as it is said in this ancient text, these people live in a certain area which was defined. And what is interesting is that in the oldest definitions of this area where this Brahmanical society was upheld, the area where the Buddha lived, which is the area east of the confluence of Ganga and Magadha, it is not included in the definitions of this Aryavarta. So the earliest definition, one of the earliest definitions comes, for example, from the famous grammarian Patanjali from the 2nd century BCE, who defines the western border of Aryavarta around the confluence of Ganga and Yamuna. So the area where the Buddha lived, the Shakya Republic, and so we can see on the map the kingdom of Kosala, and also Magadha, and the other places where the Buddha taught, are outside of this area. And so that is one point. And also we can look into the history after the Buddha and into the political history after the Buddha, where all the rulers of the kingdoms, of the larger kingdoms, and then an empire which arose in this area, which would be the first large kingdom of the Nandas, and then the empire of the Mauryas, to which also the very famous King Ashoka belonged. It seems that these kings did not pay much attention to Brahmins. It seems that they supported the ascetic traditions. They supported Buddhists, they supported Jains, and also the other traditions that arose in this area. So that is one problem with this idea that there was just a single Brahmanical culture that also the Buddha lived in. And the second problem is that suddenly there appeared very different religious ideas which do not really have a direct link in the older Brahmanical texts, in the older portions of the Vedas, like the hymns, and then the type of text that is called the Brahmana, where the sacrifices are explained and the rules for sacrifice are given. And there aren't really links to these new ideas. And what are these new ideas? They are the idea of karma, which in this context would mean the fact that all actions have consequences, and also the idea of samsara and rebirth, that there is rebirth, and rebirth is undesirable, and it is called by the accumulated karma. And then another idea is that it is possible to be liberated from from samsara, and this liberation, if we want to achieve this liberation, we should live an ascetic lifestyle. And these ideas like rebirth, karma, samsara, and also ascetic lifestyle itself, a type of lifestyle where one gives up the world, gives up their family, and goes to live a life of homelessness to achieve liberation, it does not really have a previous direct link in the previous Vedic literature. And so the other third problem which we could speak about here is that the Buddhist and Jain texts, which arose also, the early Buddhist and Jain texts, which also arose in this culture at this time, they describe a very different reality. They do not describe the same reality that the Brahmanical texts describe, with a very big importance on Brahmins and Brahmanical sacrifice. For example, we can mention one sutra where the Buddha is speaking with a Brahmin, and the Buddha mentions that Kshatriyas are superior to the Brahmins. And the Brahmin who he is speaking to just accepts this idea. He's not trying to argue with him that no, the Brahmins are the most superior group in society. So these are the problems. And then what is the solution? We could say that the Buddha certainly met with Brahmins in his life, but we can ask if these Brahmins were really followers of the Brahmanism we know, or if they were followers of some different tradition. And so the answer would be that it is very possible that there were two cultural spheres in northern India. And this was one cultural sphere in the northwest, which was a Brahmanical culture, as I have described it. And the other would be the culture of Greater Magadha. It is called Greater Magadha because the Mahajanapada of Magadha later became, which is located here, later became the most politically influential Mahajanapada of all of them. And this was a culture in the northeast. And in this northeastern culture, these Brahmanical ideas were not present or were not very common because they were created in the northwestern Brahmanical cultural sphere. And this idea that they were two cultural spheres in northern India, it has been alluded to by multiple scholars over the time. For example, it was mentioned also by Etienne Lamotte or Geoffrey Samuel and so on. But the first very rigorous argument for this was put forward by Johannes Bronkhorst in his book, which is also called Greater Magadha, which came out in 2007, and a lot of the ideas presented in this book I'm also presenting in this presentation. So if this is true, and it seems very likely that at least to some degree it is true that there were different cultural spheres in northern India, then it means that the Buddhist movement cannot really be regarded as a Protestant movement against these Brahmins. It is not a counter-reaction against their view of society. What seems more likely is that Buddhism and the Buddha's teachings arose in this culture of Greater Magadha, which where the ideas of samsara and karma and rebirth were accepted. And what the Buddha did was give a teaching on these ideas, and the Buddhist we could say Buddhist interpretation of them, or maybe in this group we could say the correct interpretation of these ideas. And so then we can just very briefly say what are the sources of this culture of Greater Magadha. So there are no direct sources, of course. Let's say this is the culture of Greater Magadha. But we can surmise or we can interpret the mentions of which we can find in Buddhist texts and also in Jain texts and also in Brahmanical texts. And these Brahmanical texts are either rejecting these ideas explicitly or they are assimilating them. So we can see in the text that they are trying to fold these new ideas into the previous Vedic worldview. So, and then what are the specific characteristics of this culture in which also the Buddha taught? So I have already mentioned them briefly. So these would be mainly the three characteristics, that there is samsara and rebirth, so that there is a cyclical life that is undesirable. And this cyclical life, the samsara, is caused by karma, the accumulation of actions. And what is more, we can be liberated from this samsara. And how can we attain liberation from samsara? Well, there are two ways which probably these traditions in ancient Greater Magadha followed, and that is either asceticism, which would be these ascetics would perform asceticism in order to stop action. And stopping action would have two reasons, and that is not to create any more karma, because karma is furthers rebirth, or to also destroy already accumulated karma. And it is important to also say that it seems that all actions were thought of as creating karma. So not just volitional actions, not just good or bad actions, but even actions are as small as breathing, were the causes of karma, and which was the cause of the continuation of rebirth. That is why with asceticism, it was very important to stop all action. And then a second way of attaining liberation would be through wisdom, through identifying with a self or with a soul, which is not active, which does not have a part in this karma, and through the identification, through attaining this liberating wisdom that we are actually the self, these traditions in Greater Magadha taught that we can achieve liberation. And then there were definitely also traditions which combined these two methods. So they combined the need for the stopping of action and also gaining wisdom. And these ideas, of course, were definitely interpreted in different ways throughout the different traditions, but they are very general ideas. And also it is worth mentioning that the Buddha's explanation of these ideas seems to have been very new, and it changed it from the basics, mostly with the idea that not all actions create karma, and it is not necessary to stop all actions and to destroy all accumulated actions in order to achieve liberation. So these are the main specific characteristics. Then some other characteristics of this culture are the building of round burial mounds, which it seems was really done in this culture generally. And also in the ancient Brahmanical text, there are mentions of the evil people that live in the east who bury their dead in round burial mounds. And we also today know these round burial mounds as stupas, so as kind of things which are built for important people to commemorate them. So it seems that this was a general characteristic of Greater Magadha culture. And then another characteristic seems to be the idea of cyclic time. That is, that not only life is cyclic and there is rebirth, but also there is the cyclic continuation of the universe, of the world. And this also seems to be something that was not present in the earlier Vedic and Brahmanical texts. And then a third characteristic that is specifically talked about also by Johannes Bronkhorst is a specific system of medicine which is built around the equalizing or balancing the humors in the body. So, and after these characteristics that we know, what are the traditions that also existed at this time, and what are the different traditions that the Buddha interacted with? So next to Buddhism, the other most important tradition is Jainism, because it is another tradition from this cultural milieu which exists up until today. And Jainism, of course, it is also as with Buddhism, it is a complex tradition that cannot be described in simple terms. But we could very simply say that Jainism, at its core, revolves around strict asceticism, which is to stop all activity and also to exhaust all accumulated karma from the past, because Jainism subscribes to this idea that all actions have consequences and we need to stop all actions. So that is one tradition. The other tradition is Ajivikism. This is a third very important tradition which which did not survive up until today, but it seems that it has existed for at least 1,000 years in India. And this tradition, it seems, taught strict determinism, meaning that everyone will attain liberation after experiencing a predetermined number of existences. However, in the last life, it is important to become an ascetic and to stop all activity. But only in the last life, because in the opposition to Jainism, in Ajivikism, it was not thought that asceticism could destroy already accumulated karma. We just have to experience the consequences. And then another tradition is, of course, Buddhism, which I do not have to describe. And then I have also mentioned here the so-called 6 teachers who are mentioned in early Buddhist texts, who are the teachers of the most important tradition at the time of the Buddha. And 2 of them are the founders of Jainism and Ajivikism. And then there were also teachers who taught that actions actually do not have any consequences. Then there was a teacher who taught nihilism or annihilationism, that after we die, we just die and everything ceases. And then there was a teacher who taught that everything is just composed of 7 elements and nothing exists. So everything is just the 7 elements. And even when they are grouped together, it is nothing more than these parts. And then there was also one teacher who taught complete skepticism, that we cannot make any judgment about the world. And so that is a very brief presentation of the cultural and religious cultural context in which Buddha arose. And I thank you for your attention. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Are there any questions? Don't be shy. Just ask your question.
Maybe Julian has interesting questions. Let them, these two great scholars, this topic, let them discuss a little bit.
I was not really prepared for
Julian,
this now.
I think you are saying something, but it's
Oh.
unmute.
Am I now unmuted? Yeah. Okay. Well, on the spot. Yeah. What should one say? But first of all, of course, thank you. It is good to know one's history, isn't it? Yeah. That's certainly true. And well, I suppose what I could say is more like an anecdote, maybe. But it seems that what happened at the time of the Buddha also happened again in the course of the development of Buddhist history. So you see, they didn't really wanted to invent the wheel anew. There were things that obviously worked, and I think you could also see the same reflex that culture and let's say religious social context of the time is reflected in the different stages of Buddhist development. So looking at Tantra, for instance, you could see that the same thing happened. Yeah? It was not the same doctrines and practices, obviously, that were taken over, but nevertheless, it was the same mechanism that you could say, well, some things that seem to have worked and with people in the culture could connect, that is smarter to use these than instead of, inventing things that nobody could understand and connect with. And in some sense, you could see that Buddhism distinguished itself by being, in that sense, rather flexible, because you can see that over the course of time and movement of the religion, it somehow managed to adapt itself in interesting ways. You can see this in Tibet, you can see this in Japan, or in China, or in Korea, or in Indonesia, wherever it went, it changed and adapted in interesting ways. And I think that in some sense, in the case of Buddhism, you could argue that it was actually shown by the founder of the religion, Buddha himself, who also showed that sense of flexibility. And I always found that interesting to observe. This is maybe something I could add. I don't know. Unfortunately, it's not really a question, but nevertheless, you're, of course, more than welcome to react to that.
No, I definitely agree with that. It really seems that throughout his Buddhist history, the Buddhists and also the Buddha himself really did not try to reinvent the wheel, but only to maybe add the Buddhist spin to the wheel. So, yeah, I think that we can see this same process throughout history. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a question. There's a raised hand. Solan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Denis, for this very interesting presentation. I have a question regarding giants. And as you explained, it seems that Jainism is being created in that time. But what do you think about the tradition of giants? Because when they speak about themselves, they tell us that their tradition is enormous old, with 24 world teachers, and the first Adinat 100,000 years before. What do you think about this worldview of giants? Is this wrong, or is
Well,
there's part of truth in them? What do you think about?
Well, I mean, here, if we are in a completely Buddhist group, I think we could answer that question clearly. But yes, it is true that Jains, similar to Buddhists, in how in Buddhism we also have the view of the previous Buddhas and the Kalpas, and that it repeats the coming of the Buddhas. So the Jains have a very similar idea, and it is actually quite similar to Buddhism. But what is different from the idea of Buddhism is that another, let's say, founder of Jainism, which Jains called Tirthankara. So in Buddhism, we say Buddha, Jains say Tirthankara. So another one can come while the teachings of the previous one still exist. So this is the case of the current Tirthankara, who was called Mahavira. And it actually seems that there could have been, the previous Tirthankara could also have been a historical person, and his teachings could have actually existed in the area of Greater Magadha. So this can be said maybe from an academic point of view, that maybe it is really correct that there was a previous teacher that Mahavira maybe built upon. But when it comes to how true their maybe their larger worldview is true, then I think I'm not qualified to give an answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so Ivan, I just put you out of the channel so that everybody can hear you.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Denis, I have a question about the compassion. I sort of read that idea of compassion existed before Buddhism and was incorporated at certain time into Buddhist teaching. What can you say about it? Was it mentioned in culture around Buddhism where it arose? Thank you.
Yeah, I have not read anything specifically about this topic, about the, maybe you could say, origin of compassion in Buddhism. But what we can say from what we know of the other traditions which existed around Buddhism at this time is that, of course, what plays a very important role is non-violence and non-harming of other sentient beings, which is brought even to a more extreme with Jainism, exactly because Jains believe that all actions create karma. But when it comes to actually the idea of compassion, and compassion as we know it in Buddhism, then I'm not very familiar with the maybe parallels of this idea in the other tradition that could have existed around Buddhism at this time. But I also have not looked specifically into this idea of compassion more rigorously.
Thank you. So there's another question in the chat. Could you name some literature on how do you pronounce this again?
It's Ajivikism.
Ajivikism, thank you.
So some literature on Ajivikism, off the top of my head, I cannot remember. I know that there is a academic book that is specifically talks about Ajivikism, but I cannot really remember the author right now. But what we can say about the literature on Ajivikism is that no Ajivika texts have survived up until today. So we have no direct sources of Ajivika doctrines. And what we can know about them is only interpretations that come from Buddhists and Jains and others who tried to disprove their ideas. So maybe I could look later for the book, because I know it. I think I also have it as electronic, but I cannot remember. I'm sorry right now the title.
Okay, thank you. There's one more raised hand. Eva?
I have a stupid question. The journalism teach about you can liberate your karma by no action. There is no teaching about Rigpa or natural mind. Is this true?
Yes, it seems that in Jainism, wisdom was not thought of as liberating. So what was liberating in Jainism was the stopping of all actions.
Okay,
So, yeah.
thank you.
Are there any yeah, Lorenz?
I have a question concerning the historical context. So if I understood well, the Brahmin societies were mostly in the West. And in Greater Magadha, there were not these strict caste systems then. So where the levels of society were completely separated. Was this then finally one of the reasons why Buddha could become so famous? Because it was not so strict, because it was more mixed, the society, or how to say, more liberal?
I mean, maybe we could say that that could have been one of the reasons why a Kshatriya could be regarded as a religious teacher, and he didn't have to be a Brahmin to be given sufficient respect. So perhaps yes, but I'm not sure if we could really, or maybe in comparison relatively to the very strict Varna society that we know, or caste society that we know later, we could relatively to this say that the culture of Greater Magadha could have been liberal, but also that does not mean that the idea of Varnas did not exist here, because they are mentioned many times in early Buddhist texts. So it is probable that they existed, but yes, they were not as strict. And also we could also say that at this time, maybe also in the Brahmanical society, the division of society was not that strict, because also from genetic studies, we know that a really strict division of society, where the members of the different Varnas couldn't marry or couldn't have children together. From genealogical studies, it seems that really became the norm only in the first half of the first millennium of our common era. So, yeah.
Excuse me, Lawrence, can you repeat your question one more? It has been cut. I didn't hear it.
Okay, I said maybe could this be one of the reasons that Buddha could become finally so famous, because in the Greater Magadha, the society was not so strictly separated into castes. So to say that this was kind of a more liberal way to live, as the Brahmin society is more, to say, strict. And this was my question.
Yes.
Historically speaking, you do not know how many followers the Buddha actually had. Yeah, this you also should not forget, because it is relatively clear that Buddhism only became widespread during the Ashokan reign, and by that time Buddha was already dead. You know, so it is also quite likely that he actually only had little followers. And additionally to that, I mean, like comparatively little in comparison to when you say becoming really famous. Yeah, so that is really two different things. What does that mean? Yeah, maybe he was famous in, you know, like his local kingdom, where maybe it was accepted that a Kshatriya rose to political power and simply became to be at the same social status than a Brahmin. Yeah? So that is also very conceivable. But the point is that you do not really know, and you also have to see that the only pictures of the historical Buddhas himself being painted, historically speaking, that a kingdom just meant, you know, like basically a farmer who was very well off in comparison to the rest. Yeah. So I mean, bringing it in this picture into history, it is of course involves much less people. It is much less, let's say, looking much less spectacular than you might think about it. Yeah? From a modern perspective.
Oh, yes. I was collecting lot of this discussion. So, end of my time, I thought I will say some of my point. I think it's going to be so many things. So in between, I take a little time. So firstly, the why Buddha came so famous in that time. So in Longchen Shedra, I was describing certain reason here, and I want to share some of this. In one of the Nagarjuna's Nagarjuna's text, prayer to the Buddhas, so Kormujik is around Saranath areas. So the prayer, it says, you went to Saranath and then you defeat all the internalism and nihilism teachers, then you are become the great winners. So that's how Nagarjuna expressed. So also Denis also mentioned about during the time there is 6 Buddhas. It's very, very much mentioned in in text. So now, first reason is Buddha is the princess, isn't prince or princess?
Prince.
Prince. So he did not hold this palace. He went to spiritual path. And then after that, he came to teach in society, but he didn't hold like this high positions. He went with. So there is the time that his father was very embarrassed that his son is going here and there. So these are the very, it's good enough to become, talk about Buddhas. That's one thing I can say. And second things, Denis describe it about maybe Magadha. Now you can say a lot of people, they know Bodh Gaya. So this area is Magadhas. So Magadhas, there is not much strict Brahmin culture. That's you describe in that way. But what I see is, for example, King Bimbisar and Ajatashatru. Bimbisar was his student, Ajatashatru his son after he become his student. They face very big issue that Buddha accept low caste. For example, Angulimala, who are criminal, one of the wanted list as a terrorism in Ajatashatru's kingdom, and they become follower of him, and they become quite respectful teachers. So many ministers, they have been raised issue to the Ajatashatru. So he has difficult to hold that politics. One, his minister, one, his teacher, what Buddha is doing. So that is one. And there is one Sunil, untouchable person who was cleaning and clean Buddha's footpath, they throw throne. So his story has been very famous. So anyhow, or strict or not strict, anyhow, Buddha against this caste system. That can be one reason to the being famous. And the third thing, people told very easily, he went through the Bodh Gaya to Saranath. Why he goes so far? because when you look at in history, Sarnath was the birth of Sanskrit language and Vedic central place. So Buddha went especially to kind of present his view. So, and there what actually, of course, he didn't accept or refuse these greater internalisms. So that can be one reason to being very famous. And that's one. And the student, I want to tell you, the 5 of his friends at that time, one is a scholar, one is philosopher. They have already their followers. Some they have 60. One of them have around 300. They have already their teachers. Then when they five people become the student of Buddha, immediately he has already in one session, one presentation, he has around 300 students immediately. So this can be elements, just I think can be elements to being famous and being develop immediately big groups. That's all.
Thank you, Rinpoche. There was one other hand raised, I think by Marian Goldberg. Do you still want to ask your question, or was it answered already?
Да, добрый день. Очень большой дискуссию здесь можно наблюдать о причинах популярности Будды в его время. Да, это бесспорно важный вопрос, и да, возможно, следствие того, что он был рожден в царской семье, либо приобрел последователей стихийно.
Followers, but I think the question is how growth of his teaching is connected with that his teaching was different from teachings at that time. It was like wholesome teaching, answering the question about cause of suffering and how to stop suffering. And one of the main points. That's it.
So just to make sure, the question is how were the teachings of the Buddha different from the other teachers?
Еще раз уточню, чем отличалась. Я, по-моему, seems like I'm speaking in the main channel. In the main channel, can you make me speak in Russian channel again?
Can you please clarify the question first? If this was the question.
I should clarify. Okay, let's try. Okay. The question, the main point, I guess, was the widespreading of Buddha's teaching connected with the point that this teaching was like very different from what was at the time in the area. Like it was very wholesome and answered very important questions of people. I guess it's the main point of the question.
Okay, I understand. Well, if we wanted to answer from maybe an academic point of view, then we cannot really give a answer to this question. It cannot really be answered if this was really the reason why Buddhism gained popularity, or because there are no texts which would mention that the people are turning to Buddhism for this reason or for this reason, and things like that. So I think that this question cannot really, from an academic point of view, cannot really have a clear answer.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Comments?
Да, окей, спасибо большое. Я, в принципе, более развернуто спрашивал не только о причинах отличия, в том, что они заключались в отличии учения, только в том, действительно ли отличие учения было настолько радикальным, что могло быть причиной. Ну, окей, ладно. Ответа достаточно, спасибо.
Okay, thank you. The answer is very, very good. Thank you.
Dennis, check Kepper Parto ha Goyove.
Kipper
Kepper Parto.
Pakt.
Kepper Park Bitopa, the one, the Sanjela Topa Chiore, the Lopen Tupson Tupche. Ha Goyove, Kepper Parto. That can be one element how not all of that text, but he was Lopen Tupton Tupche was before in Hindu spiritual teachers. After that, he became Buddhist, and he wrote these differences between Hindu and the Buddhist. So each shloka he based on he make it based on the Vedic or later scriptural history and Buddhist view. He put it each shlokas. For example, why Brahman has 4 heads, and for example, and why Shiva has 3rd eyes. And then he very much compare. So this can be maybe something just to talk about how at that time Buddhists become in a famous topic, maybe. So do you know this text name? The Julian Hakuyeve in English?
I actually do not know. No.
Julian?
No, I'm not aware. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Have to look. No idea.
Okay.
What is that in Sanskrit? Arya Vishesha? I don't know. Something like that. Lakshana, I don't know. Check.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful questions. I think there are no more questions to this topic, so I think Julian, it's your turn now.
Okay, so since we advanced in time, I will skip all rhetoric unnecessities and try to do it very straightforward here. Just let me share this little presentation that I tried to produce. Is that the one? Here, maybe. Yeah, okay. Very good. I just have to use this Control and Shift. I think it does work. Doesn't it do it? First, I have to get back here. Boom. Check. Is that okay?
Yes.
Does something happen? Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. We had this short chat with Rinpoche and asked to talk about these 3 turnings of the Dharma wheel, these 3 classical evolvement of the teachings. So very, very shortly. But I will try to connect some of the terminology, maybe with a couple of terminology that is connected to it, but that you might not always hear. Yeah. So to give some some form of, I mean, if I just repeat what you already know, I could also simply not do it, and therefore I tried to give it at least some form of a spin that maybe carries some valid information. Yeah. So very shortly, I mean, you know the three turnings, yeah. You know the three famous places, yeah. Sarnath, Rajagriha, and Vaishali, which are connected to the three turnings. And just to repeat that very shortly, so the first turning is connected to the Four Noble Truths, the second turning is connected to mostly Prajna Paramita, which in the Longchen Shedra we use the title non-characteristics, where Buddha taught the non-characteristics of all phenomena. And the third turning is usually connected to, I mean, it's not as easy to pinpoint that to a specific literature, but you could say it is that people generally seem to connect it to something that they call Yogacara. Other name for Yogacara is Chittamatra, yeah, or Vinyapti Matra. This is all the different terms. Tibetan mostly Tsemtsam, yeah. So one of these schools that we also say is a philosophical school next to Madhyamaka and others, and also connected to this third turning is the Buddha nature theory, yeah, or Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha Garbha, or Buddha Dhatu, all these kinds of words that are usually used to refer to this third teaching. And in the Shedra, we call this distinguishing great clarity. And what I will try a little bit as I go along is to give you an overview not only of what that contains, but also to give you at least one or two examples of why these labels, non-characteristics and the distinguishing of great clarity can reasonably be used to describe these two turnings of the wheel. And before I do this, I should also very briefly mention that particularly in Tantra, because, you know, like Tantric people, they, let's say they like to come up with to give stuff like a special twist. So in several of these more esoteric lineages, we also talk of four turnings of the wheel. So just for the sake of completion, I should mention this. So very famously, Dzogchen is often given as one of these examples where a fourth turning of the wheel is asserted. And connected to the number of these wheels is always a distinguishing of the famous, let's say, dichotomy of which teachings are given on a conventional level and which teaching are given on an ultimate level. So this we often call Neyartha and Nitartha in Sanskrit, or you could also call it that there is ideas about which teachings require interpretation and which are not requiring interpretation. This could be another way of doing this, and this is often very important in determining which kind of status do have certain teaching for certain religious groups. Yeah? So just to give you one example, if I'm belonging to the Theravadins and I would only say, good, I only stick to the old teachings, yeah, and I only assert them as originally taught by the Buddha, and they would say this already carries the ultimate meaning. For them, this distinction is not relevant. But it becomes relevant once I assert, for instance, that I'm not accepting that as the ultimate teaching and the only teaching of the Buddha, but I belong, let's say, to some Mahayana formation, and because these teachings, I would say, they are exceeding that of what is asserted by the Theravadins or Hinayana teachings. Therefore, their teachings become in need of interpretation, whereas my own teachings, of course, would be ultimate. And with the same, let's say, kind of rhetoric, we operate through the different developments. And just, you know, like to tell you this, that this is one thing that is sometimes good to keep in mind, because when sometimes says about a certain teaching that it is ultimate or not ultimate, then you have an idea, you know, like about where doctrinally and historically speaking those people are situated, because this rhetoric is always being used, generally speaking. Just a side note, okay? So going to the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the first turning, and there we have the very famous Dharmacakra Pravartana Sutra, And this is, by the way, one of these rare teachings that are existing in Pali from an early time onward, and is also, just as a side note, one of the few texts that was translated into the Kangyur, the Tibetan Buddhist canon, directly from the Pali, but not the Sanskrit, and which gives us really the idea that it must have been a relatively ancient thing. Yeah. And I just take here the translation from one of these early 20th century German philologists, yeah, just brought it into English, not bothering really looking at the original, which is always full of problems. Yeah? So he says, furthermore, monks, this is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. To be united with what is unpleasant is suffering, to be separated from what is pleasant is suffering. If one wants something and does not get it, that also is suffering. In brief, the 5 groups of grasping are suffering. So, and this is connected, one could say, to the first of the 4 noble truths, idam dukkham, this is suffering, or life is suffering. But of course, it does not mean that everything is bad. It merely does mean that for as long as one is clinging to the idea of an individual self, grasping at that idea, that qualifies suffering. So that is, of course, a distinction that one has to make. And it is usually the idea of the self then usually is connected to the constituents that make up a person, yeah, and that would be the 5 skandhas, broadly speaking, yeah. And then he goes on to say, further, monks, this is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is the thirst, Krishna, which often is more or less equivalent with ignorance in later traditions, leading to the rebirth which, accompanied by delight and passion, finds enjoyment here and there, namely thirst of desire, thirst of becoming, thirst for annihilation. And that would be connected to the doctrine of pratitya samutpada, or in Tibetan tendril, dependent origination, or however you want to translate that. Yeah, that gives rise to this mistaken conception of the self. And the sutra, or the sutta, continues, furthermore, monks, this is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the cessation of thirst through complete passionlessness, giving up, refusing emancipation, and not holding on to it. The equivalent of which is clearly nirvana. This can be the only equivalent that we can find, which is constituting the 3rd noble truth. Furthermore, monks, this is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is the noble truth, 8-fold path, namely right view, right thought, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right striving, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The noble 8-fold path. That is I think this is the shortest definition in a sermon that was given, in one of the probably earliest sources that we have. It might be nice to just read it out for oneself. These translations are actually relatively straightforward, and they are not even as repetitive as some of the other things. I mean, like Pratnya Paramita in 100,000 lines is basically unbearable. Yeah, it's just too long. It's too repetitive. Nobody can deal with that, but that's like relatively straightforward and actually quite nice. So that is the short summary of it. Which is, I think, good to bear in mind. Yeah. Oh, there is a typo. I see. It says idam dukkham ayam. So this is this is the suffering. That is this origin of suffering. That's the cessation of suffering, and that is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. That's the very short formula that we all know. And so, what is there to say in terms of doctrine? You would think, well, it is relatively straightforward, but you know, I was at least trying to give you this few doctrinal connections. As you can see, that once you start really discussing it, of course, a world full of philosophy and doctrine is usually unfolding. And in some sense, there is even the possibility to try explaining to yourself many of the core doctrines that make up Buddhism just by analyzing the relations of the different members of these 4 truths of the noble ones. I always wrote 4 noble truths. I think it is something that is, this is like an old vasana of mine, you know, I just heard it so often. this latent traces or habitual tendencies, or however you call it. Although I think that Four Truths of the Noble Ones is actually a much better translation. Anyway, I think the Arya should refer to the Buddhas, yeah, or to the Buddha in that case, of those reaching insight in some form or the other. Yeah. Of course, you can say that the truths themselves are also noble, but I really think that that to dissolve the compound in the sense of the Four Truths of the Noble One actually makes much better sense. Okay, fair enough. But you can see, yeah, I'm caught in my own, in my own bad habits. Yeah, and difficult to break through from that. So how does it then work to categorize these four noble truths in terms of explaining philosophy? So the first one here, dukkha, suffering, and the dukkha samudayo, the origin or the cause of suffering, the source of suffering, that it is relatively easy to say that this is equivalent to our idea of samsara. Yeah. And the same for the second layer, truths number 3 and number 4, the cessation of suffering and the path that leads to that, which would be equivalent to nirvana. And already, as you can see, is that you may focus on one of these levels, although, of course, one of them would not work without the other. So you can say you have on the left-hand side, when you have suffering and the cessation of suffering, that is to say, suffering and happiness. You could also say this sounds like a resultative thing, whereas on the right layer, truths number 2 and number 4, you have something that is qualifying the cause, yeah, to reach that state. So you could say that truths number 1 and 2, they are corresponding to samsara, and number 3 and number 4, they are corresponding to nirvana, and number 1 and number 3, they are corresponding to the fruit, and number 2 and number 4, they are corresponding to the cause. And there you already have a very well-known dichotomy, as you know, yeah. So you have samsara, nirvana, cause and result, as well as you have implicitly present the idea of interdependent origination, in the terms of that there is a duality implied between each of these two, where one cannot exist without the other, or where you could say that each of them coexists with the other and thus is not ultimately real, but depending on the fact that the other one is existing too, right? And in that sense, you could say you have many of the core tenets present in that relatively easy scheme. So, and it is also possible to find the 3 different yanas represented in there, not in the sense that, not in the sense that you could say that they are not valid in their own way of interpreting it for everybody, but you could say they are present there in the sense of that it's a matter of on which of these aspects you focus, right? So if you, for instance, imagine that you mainly focus on truth number 1 and 2, where you really just want to get rid of the idea of Atman, reaching the un-Atman state, so that you're really focusing on eliminating the cause of suffering, that would usually be qualified as what we call a Hinayana, or approach, which many people see equivalent with Theravada, or the schools of Sautrantika and Vaibhashika. So you could say that this is what they're mainly focusing on. Yeah? Although they are, of course, also applying the other aspects that are inherent there. And then you could say, well, on the Mahayana level, you could say that once the Bodhisattva ideal comes in, you are not mainly focusing on the liberation of yourself, but you're focusing on applying a path for the benefit of others. Therefore, the focus would not be set on the first, let's say, on the first row of truths, number 1 and 2, but rather on number 2 and 4. So you could say there is a focus that is shifting from one layer to the other layer. Yeah. Although everything is always present everywhere, you might not set the same emphasis on what you're looking at. And then, in terms of how comes Vajrayana into place, you could say, well, they are really focusing on the cessation of suffering in the sense that one very common way of interpreting Vajrayana or Mantranaya, the method of the mantra, is to identify directly with the goal. So you could say you can actually flip over or clap into each other each of these truths. So imagine you have 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So you can just say you can clap one into the other, and then you can fold the other one into the rest, right? And by doing that, you see that everything is represented at the same time in everything else, while at the same time setting a very distinct focus. So in that game, you can play from all directions, right? And in that sense, you could actually say that analyzing these 4 noble truths properly, while trying to look at what is the tenets and the doctrines and the yanas, can give you a very nice introduction of the teachings of Buddhism in general, right? Yeah, so I thought I developed once this little scheme, and I thought maybe it's like fun to kind of think it through somehow. Yeah. Okay, when we go to the next one, number 2, and I really try to be quick. I said I was purposely focusing a bit more on this number 1 because I thought it's kind of nice of sharing that stuff. Yeah. Okay, so number 1 is usually associated with Prajna Paramita. As you know, one of the main points of Prajna Paramita is explaining shunyata, emptiness, which you could say can be translated in terms of what it implies with the idea of non-characteristics. Why is that the case? Because nothing really has an inherent nature, right? And this is what is mainly taught by the doctrine of emptiness. Yeah? And when it is then integrated into the Bodhisattva path, we are ending actually up, with noble truths number 3 and 4, you could say, in some sense. Of course, I mean, it's not equivalent in the sense that it's really the same, but at least it's sufficiently overlapping, you might say, right? So, and this is, of course, what I try to find here. A little bit of primary literature, the same as with the 4 noble truths. I think this is what for many people is the absolute core of Prajna Paramita teachings. Yeah. Iha Shariputra Rupam Shunyata Shunyata Eva Rupam Rupam na Pratak Shunyata Shunyata na Pratak Rupam Yad Rupam Sa Shunyata Ya Shunyata Tat Rupam Evam Eva Vidana Samya Samskara Vijnanam. So form is emptiness, and indeed emptiness in form, and form is not separate from emptiness, and emptiness is not separate from form. That which is form, that is also empty, and that which is empty, that is also form. And in this way, it is the same with the constituent elements: feeling, formation, consciousness, and mental fabrication. I do not know how you want to translate them, but maybe not so important. The 5 skandhas. Yeah. And he is listing here only Vedana, Samkhya, Samskara, Vijnana, because Rupa is already the first of the 5 skandhas. Yeah. So you can say that each of the constituents that make us up and by means of which we perceive the world, they are empty in the sense that they are coexisting with emptiness, and they are qualified by emptiness, and yet there is appearance. So nothing really ultimately exists. Therefore, it does lack any inherent quality. Yeah, there is the teaching of non-characteristics. So this is from the Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, the short version. Yeah, which is I really think by far the most well-known among the Prajna Paramita literatures, and right after that comes the famous mantra, right? Gata Gata Para Gata Para Samgate Bodhisvaha, which for sure you have heard. Yeah? That's the end of that sermon. Yeah. And I think if you think it through and think about, like what do these statements imply, it's actually very conceivable that we call the second teaching that of the non-characteristics. Although it does not really account, of course, for the Bodhisattva ideal and the Bodhisattva path, but that's probably okay if we mainly focus, let's say, on the doctrine that is being taught here. And of course, you know, whatever is included in all of this teaching is of course not only Prajnaparamita, although even that is of course a massive text corpus, but many other sutras. So going to the third, there is also just like one short example. The third teaching, which is connected to the Yogacara or Chittamatra, and at the same time the Tathagata Garbha, that is usually considered the third teaching, and the most famous one, which is by many people considered the first Yogacara teaching, is contained in the so-called Arya Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra. Maybe you have heard it. Other people also say it's the Samadhi Raja way. That is a little bit disputed, but many people agree on this. And what is taught there is what usually is asserted classical Yogacara doctrine. That is to say, the 8 consciousnesses, most importantly the teaching of Alaya Vijnana, which we call the stored consciousness, and also the idea that ultimately everything that we perceive is merely consciousness or merely mind, vinyapti matra, yeah? Or you can also say, instead of merely consciousness, you can also say merely mind, yeah? Chitta matra, that is also okay. So there is various terms to designate this. So what does that mean? And why is it a development, you could say, of the Prajnaparamita literature? Because the idea here is that you do not fall into a wrong sense of nihilism by not correctly applying the idea of non-characteristics. Because there is an underlying substratum, namely the mind and the potential of the mind, with which you can develop that essence. And in that sense, you could say what you're doing is you're asserting a form of ultimate view, in which you assert on the one hand that there is mind, and that you can perceive things, but what you perceive is at the same time still not having any real inherent truth to it. And therefore, you could call it distinguishing great clarity. Why? Because it distinguishes between what is right and what is wrong, but it is clear because the mind, in fact, is active. Yeah, there is not just a dumb blank state, but there is a part, sort of, you could say, luminosity. Yeah, some people also call it chitta prabhasvara. Yeah, so there is a luminosity of the mind in the sense that it has the power to perceive, and you cannot determine anything else, that the mind is there and is being active, yet lacking all kinds of qualities and characteristics that you cannot analyze it in any way whatsoever. So, and that is the first part. The second part that is associated to it, that is the Tathagata Garbha, this theory. And I think you all have heard probably sufficiently enough about that theory of Buddha nature. So at least to give you like a very few ideas about what it means. So Garbha, in fact, means womb. Yeah. Most originally, Garbha means womb. So the womb of the Tathagata, or the embryo of the Tathagata, which then people, of course, say means something like the essence of a Tathagata. And the question here, of course, is that is a, let's say, it's a linguistic problem a little bit, and this is actually has posed many issues with regard to what Tathagata actually means, how it's supposed to be grammatically understood. Yeah, and people are still debating this wildly, I'd say. And one of these interpretations, for instance, regards the fact if it is a so-called, I mean, if this compound actually is a noun or an adjective. If it's an adjective, it means that it's pertaining to a quality that describes people. And that means that, you know, theoretically, most of the people should have it. When it's just a noun, it could say, okay, there exists such a thing, but not necessarily everybody needs to have it. Yeah, and there is already like one, at least doctrinally and historically speaking, it is by no means the case that everybody accepted that theory. To many people, it's coming very shocking, but there were a lot of great philosophers who did not accept that theory. And this mainly depends on how they interpret the word in the given context and what it actually refers to, and whether the recipients is basically beings or whether it's, let's say, an intellectual concept that by no means need to be applied to all forms of life and to everybody. So that is, at least historically speaking, an interesting thing, that it's not necessarily the case that this was asserted, because some uphold the theory that there is people who are simply incapable of ever becoming a so-called stream enterer. Yeah, that they are simply lost. You know, there were actually thinkers who said, okay, some people are just lost. Yeah, and this is not something, of course, that is being taught here or in the context of Tibetan Buddhism, but nevertheless, these theories existed. Yeah, and they were quite strong with some very famous authors, such as, for instance, Ratnakara, you know, like one of the great abbots of Vikramashila, who wrote one of the most famous commentaries on the Hevashra Tantra, and also the standard textbook on poetry for Tibetans. He, for instance, did not accept the Tathagata Garbha theory. Yeah? So it was also in later tantric circles with quite prominent people, you could see that this is one of, let's say, the most debated and shakiest doctrines in that sense. So, and last but not least, we're closing with the very small very small thing that some people are also not aware of. A tiny thing, Tathagata. The word Tathagata, which is actually very nice. I do not know if you had thought about it, but I thought when we are at least talking about the compound for a very short moment, we can also analyze it completely. So the first part, of course, the Garbha, wound, essence, or having the essence or realm or state of nature. There is all of these different possibilities of how you render it, where you can see actually the range of possibilities, and the range of possibilities also showing you about let's say, that kind of unclear state of affairs, in the sense that it's not totally clear to everybody what that actually means. Yeah. So, and the same goes for Tathagata. Also, the options are easier, and the explanation usually is relatively neat and straightforward and elegant. So, Tathagata, when we dissolve that compound, because of Sanskrit sandhi roots, we can either dissolve it in the sense of tata and gata, or we can dissolve it as tata and agata. The first version means having thus gone. The second one meaning is having thus come. So, and both interpretations is valid. Yeah. So you could say he is, and one way of how commentators like to take it, that he has gone from samsara and come back from nirvana. Yeah? And this is actually like a very nice assertion to the idea of an awakened bodhisattva emanating back for the sake of beings. Yeah. So, and it's even there it is contained in the word. You could say it's kind of a intentional ambiguity that is there, a wordplay, you might say. And actually, primary language does this a lot. You have to see, like in ancient India, it was considered a certain form of elegance that things are ambiguous, that is to say, displaying several layers of meaning at once, you know, whereas in the West, this is not liked so much, yeah, because then there is always uncertainty about what it ultimately means, yeah. So there is really a different mindset behind, you might say. So, fair enough. I think I'm done. I managed like in 5 minutes under time, yes, for not making it too long. This is, so please excuse me for having rushed a tiny bit. But nevertheless, yeah, we were quick and straightforward. I hope that was kind of understandable. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And I can stop that sharing, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Before we take the questions, I have a little bit of commercial time here. Because Dolpo Tulku Rinpoche is offering a pilgrimage to Nepal in March, and you're welcome to join to visit the important places, like the sacred places of the Buddha. And if I'm right informed, you will also join, Julian.
Yeah, that's true. I'm also there.
So
on this pilgrimage, you will have the pleasure that Rinpoche will be teaching, and Julian will also share his knowledge there. So Rinpoche will also teach meditation and some pranayama and soft yoga exercises. And yeah, so you're very welcome to join this wonderful journey. I'll share the web page in the chat so you can have a look at it closer. Okay, end of the commercial.
As it usually is, when people do not ask questions, it was either totally clear or a total disaster.
Or the time is just, you know, issue. So are there any questions?
There seems to be a question in the chat.
Oh.
Okay. Let's see, what is that? Okay. So where does it start? Maybe only really the last one here. Yeah, Tathagata could also be connected to Paragata and Pratnya Paramita. Well, difficult to say. Yeah, I suppose the question means that the compound is connected to the idea of that mantra. Yeah, sure. I mean, in some sense, yes. It says gone, gone, gone beyond, completely gone beyond to the other side, right? So yes, having thus gone could be taken as a short formula that in essence talks more or less about the same thing. Although perhaps there are many, many contexts in where that not work, yeah, depending where you are. But let's say at least when you're within this Pratnya Paramita literature, probably yes. Although I do not remember that the term Tathagata is ever being used there. But that's a different question, I guess. True.
No other questions? So Rinpoche, do you want to give a conclusion?
Wait, they will. Let's still we wait. Do we have a time, or we are finishing our time?
We are all already late.
Okay. Okay, so I'm really satisfied that I invite the two great speakers. We have in Buddhist or in the text, it says you should go into your practice by certainty, not just blind faith, and how to develop your certainties. Or if you don't have any idea about Buddha and Buddha's teaching and practice, then you should get certainty, not just jumping there, not just connecting there to develop certainties. And if you have that, you should develop more. Then now it comes, then how we generate that certainties. And then two things. It says, if you don't explain the history, then people get doubtful. So And also, you see, whenever you read sutras, and it begins with the history, where Buddha taught, and which place, and how, and which groups. So always begin with the sutras. A sutra are begin with the history. So therefore, history is also clarifying about many things. Therefore, history is one of the elements to get the how to call certainties. And then Lengxi, Julian, do you know Lengxi?
Yes, I'm just lacking the
Lengxi in Tibetan is the beginning of the sutra that we call Lengxi. And always Lengxi's purpose of telling Lengxi means how the sutra have been taught. And that gives you certainty of the history of the practice or teaching. That's one important. After that, okay, now that you know, okay, there is a text. There is a text that you have a doubtful. Is it from Buddha's teaching or is it from different founder of religions? When you have a doubtful, and there to give certainty is, it depends on the history. Okay. And after that, you clarify the historical point of view, you have a knowledge, but then this, which comes historically proved by Buddha's teachings, for example, and that teaching is relevant or not. So is it good to practice or not? To get certainty for that question, then you have to use the logic. So reasons. So these two are very important things. History and the reasons. These two makes you to clarify many things. So, and therefore today, both of speaker touch for historical point of view. At the same time, also many topic of the meanings. So the story talks, lets history reflect a lot of the teachings, and teaching also very often reflect history. So that has been today here. And now my point here, all, it's an option for us that we can collect their what they give source, and then we can research. And my point of view first about the Denis topic, when I read, for example, earlier sutra in the Father Sutra, Vinaya Sutra, Father Vinaya Sutra, Sosartharvido, and this, when it comes, this monks and full audience and the bhikshunis, it comes very often. It's how to call it, against for the caste systems. So these texts would be very good to very good. It could be good elements to bring this topic. That could be one. And very, very famous word I would like to translate in my poor English. Rigmitso, Ryumitso, Lapa Rinpoche Tso. So Buddha's one of the essence teaching is not important is the burn, river, burn, And not important is the curse is not important. Your born is not important. The important is the knowledge and the practice. So this kind of essential sentence, it looks like for me it seems to like very much directly or indirectly against this how to say caste systems. And there is a very Pali also in Pali, and we have a very much famous history about the Sunil. Okay, so just maybe next time we can research that. And that also they make very nice movie also with the Sunil, the new film about Buddha. There is a very nice about that is they make it fully 1 chapters. I saw it that time. So this is generally some elements for the which Dennis give wonderful topic. You can collect this, then you will get your own idea. That's it. And the second part about the 3 Dharma wheels, it has been also great lecture. And the third Dharma wheel I want to talk a little bit because now I am writing about that. I presented this topic in Namduling recently last month. So this is very, very big, how to call presentations. You have to speak front of the 2,000 monks, and mainly the scholar Campbells, they will debate with you, they will ask question you. So I presented that. So I'm completing this topic. So based on that, what I can say is the Lepa number 7, what we use in the 4th?
But this distinguishing great clarity.
Yes.
Right.
Great distinguish, the Dharma will of great distinguish. So we use that in our Longchen Shedra. So in this text, this group of the sutras, and they have you can see there is a few totally going different directions. For example, one sutra, it says 3 will is truly exists, and no, at the end there is 3 yanas, result is exist. And one sutra says at the end there is only 1 yanas, not 3. 3 are temporarily as a path. At the end there is only 1 yanas. So that, and second difference is all sentient being has a Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbhas. And whoever, which sutra talks final is the one yana, and that says at the all sentient beings at the end they have to be enlightened. They will enlightenment. They have a chance. Therefore, there is only one past, which is Buddha nature, cover for all sentient beings. And one sutra they said naturally in a sentient being, among the sentient being, some they have a Buddha nature, some they don't have it. So 2, again there is 2. And also emptiness, when they explain emptiness, one they said all phenomena are not emptiness. This is Trangden, how to say Trangden? Neden and infinitive meaning or?
I don't know, ultimate meaning, maybe, or how do they say definitive meaning? I guess.
Definitive.
Yeah.
Eva, Trangden and Ngeden.
I think we said provisional meaning
Oh
and
yeah,
Okay.
professional meanings. So other one,
ultimate.
ultimate meaning and provisional meaning. So one sutra says that all phenomena, which is saying all phenomena are empty, and that is professional. What is it?
Provisional.
Provisional meanings. And one sutra says it's ultimate meanings. So there has two kind of things Buddha taught, totally different paths. So there, what happened is, one, the Chittamatra class philosopher follow to the ultimately exist three yanas, and there is a Buddha nature is not exist for all sentient beings, and all phenomena are not emptiness. And there is Prasangikas follow the other sutra. In ultimately, there is one yanas. All sentient being has Buddha nature, and all phenomena is emptiness. So, for example, Asanga has a commentary about based on Uttarshastra Tantras, and that whatever link with this text, also it goes Prasangika's side, and there is other 8 texts. I don't know how to say it, but eight texts. Okay, then you can find it. And that mainly explain with the other side and Chittamatra philosophies. So therefore now great distinguish how refer the great distinguish has a different meanings. And one is clarifying more about Buddha nature. At the Chittamatra, it says great distinguish means which one is emptiness, which one is not emptiness. It's clarifying with the three topics. Okay, so 3 topics I'm saying here. You will get it right, the terminology, or the Longchen Shedra student know. We learn about the Chittamatra philosophy. So they said all phenomena is not empty, and do you know the three in Chittamatra, 3 be great, or if whoever remember, please help me. There's English term. Kuntak Xianwang Yongzhu. Kuntak Xianwang, one is depending.
We call them 3 natures, no? Commonly.
Yeah.
This is 3 svabhava is the term. And usually it's like we call them 3 natures. I mean, mostly I did.
3 characteristics. 3 nature, 3 characteristics. So they said, anyway, which one is emptiness, which one is not emptiness. That's distinguished in 3rd Dharma wheels. So Chittamatra explained that side, and some Buddha nature sutra and Prasangikas, the distinguish, they explain how Buddha nature, how to clarify, how to brought that topic widely. So that's the meaning of distinguish. So that's some I want to share with you. I've found this, and then finally in the future, someone, I hope someone translated that, and then see we again. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you very much, Julian, for your wonderful presentations. It was really very interesting and a pleasure to listen. And thank you, Rinpoche, for your conclusion. And thank you all for your patience and because now it's very late, and also for your questions. And so if you're interested in this wonderful 4-year Longchen Shedra study program, visit our homepage. There you can find more information about it. And so unfortunately in 2024, Rinpoche will not start a new group, but the year after, then you're welcome to join this program. And I type the website in the chat, so you can just click and be there.
Oh, Carmen, you referred this. Now I cannot handle it. I'm handling 2 groups for 4 years projects. So the first group is, it left only 1.5 year, and we will have a lot of tutor and helper. So I wish in 2025 we will start. Oh, regret is being happy, laughing. So we will start at the 4th group in 2025. So